I'm a history teacher and I work in a Lycée and College in Brest in France. And the international section is something that is quite popular in French schools. Not every school has one, but essentially it's a section where students can have 6 extra hours of tuition in a second language. So in my school, it's British, or English rather, it's a British section. There are schools, I think in Paris, Saint-Germain-en-Laye has 14 sections. So they do a variety of different languages. And the idea is just to sort of develop the language, in this case English, through 4 hours of language and literature and 2 hours of history and geography, which students do over and above their ordinary timetable. Many of our students are, well, all of our students are French nationals. Some of our students have lived abroad for a short period of time because Brest is a naval city, so they may have had a little bit of time living overseas. But generally, most of them are French as a first language. They may have other languages that they speak at home, but English, they may have maybe a few students with an English-speaking parent, but on the whole, they're French through and through. So my journey to the EAL was really by accident. I was struggling in my early years of balancing the teaching of history with the language, not quite getting the balance right, especially with the younger students. I'd looked at content and language integrating learning, or CLIL, and found, you know, that had got some ideas, but it really wasn't what I was after. And when I went to a meeting in Paris, subject meeting, Graham was there working with one of the prestigious schools in Paris, and he did a workshop, and it was really was a light bulb moment. Everything just made so much sense. And when I went back to Brest, I came a little bit evangelical about it, and it really has informed my teaching. It's really brought the students on, and it's just made everything fall into place, particularly with the younger students. So we were delighted when Graham visited us earlier this year, and we achieved the Gold Award. We're really thrilled with that. And as I've said to Graham, you know, for me, this is just the start of the journey rather than the end of it. Okay, so today I'm going to speak on how an emphasis on speaking and listening leads to high levels of literacy. And for me, I think listening is a very underrated skill, one that is really difficult for students, I think, because it happens in real time. If they're reading, you know, they can go back if they've missed a chunk, and they can tend to get the meaning from the context, or they can get the gist of it. Talking, again, once the student runs out of words, they stop. Whereas with listening, you know, it's very demanding. And so for me, listening is very important, because by the time the students get to years 12 and 13, because of the constraints of time, most of my lessons tend to be lectures, and they need to have those skills. Okay, so this is what we're going to look at, or I'm going to go through today. So for me in college, it's about getting the students to listen in short bursts, to speak in short bursts, and to try and give control to the students as quickly as possible, to break down the cognitive load that listening requires. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the preparation for this particular lesson that I'm going to use as an example today, we prepare and break it down into big ideas, into smaller ideas. And the textbook that we use is an English textbook. It corresponds quite nicely with the French curriculum, and it's cheap enough for the students to have their own copy. So it's authentic reading text. So by using the textbook and the worksheet, we start to sort of build up their knowledge and start to guide the students in the direction that we really want them to go. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? So this is a copy of the book that we use. The language can be a little bit tricky at times for international students, and we have to break it down and take that into consideration. But the lesson that we're focusing on today was just a small chunk of this, which is marked in the pink here, and it's the Schlieffen Plan, which was part of the early stages of the First World War. So this is kind of the knowledge part of the lesson. So the students may have read that for homework, and we will have gone through the language and a little bit in class before we start writing and talking. Okay, next slide, please. So the Schlieffen Plan, this is their first lesson, and it starts off quite simple. The students can just really lift information from the text and put it in these boxes, particularly the top 3 boxes, very simple. What was the Schlieffen Plan? What did the Germans plan to do first and why? And what were they planning on to do next? The bottom tier of questions require a little bit more thought. Sort of what evidence is there that the Schlieffen Plan failed? And they called upon to make judgments as well. So there's a simple lead-in on the top level, and then it gets a little bit more complicated or complex on the bottom. But by the time they've done that, they're really ready for the next stages. I also asked them to colour in the part of the jigsaw that they think is the most important or significant. And again, this is calling on the students to make a judgment on their own, and they won't really get that from the book. This is where they have to kind of think and process the information and then justify it where I've written because on the text there. Okay, so having done that, which might have taken a lesson to discuss it and go through it, we then move on to the next stage. If I could have the next slide, please. So how do we do stuff? Well, turn and talk, use that in every single lesson. Pair work just enables the weaker students to talk more confidently in a safe environment. You know, not everybody wants to put their hand up. Collaborative work, again, I tend to do this by ability because I find that there are always those who will take advantage of group work to hide or not to do as much work as they should be doing. And again, translanguaging, and I'm very fortunate in that because all the students speak French, it makes it very, very easy for them to do that. So that is a definite advantage, but it just helps students to get their ideas down first. And once they've got it, we can then start refining it in English. So collaborative work, pair work, and translanguaging is really, really important. Could I have the next slide, please? And again, before we get students to really develop big ideas, I'd like them to do the front the writing, which is a Lemov idea, and it gets them to put something down in writing before they feed back to the rest of the class. And again, this helps the confident and less confident speakers alike. You know, they've got a script that they can refer to if they need to. So if I can just have the next slide, which should show, yeah, here we go, the group work. So I love using political cartoons in history. I'm aware that they're very culturally loaded, and obviously some of them are very old as well. So this one here actually refers to the Schlieffen plan. However, it's not evident without that prior knowledge. Now, the questions I've put around the side of the cartoon are a little bit more detailed, and it's just to kind of show you the kind of questions that we ask. I would probably break this down into maybe 4 or 5 boxes in a lesson, but this is just to give you an indication of the type of analysis that the students will be doing. At the side, at the bottom, I've put the useful vocabulary, which is in French, just to help them with the more tricky elements of the language that are there. And they will work in small groups, 3 or 4, and try and work out answers to these questions. So they're analysing it, they're going around the cartoon, and they're talking in French, English, mixture of the two. I really don't mind, and just filling in these ideas. At the end of the process, we'll come back together, we'll discuss it. Obviously, the students can refer to what they have written down here, and I will use a projector or a visualizer to try and hone in on samples of students' work where we can give immediate feedback and discuss different interesting ideas and elements. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Oh, that is the end of the, okay, sorry, I thought there was another one. So at the end of that, after we've looked at the visualizer, we will discuss it, and we will perhaps follow that up with homework where the students might condense what they've analysed into a paragraph or 1 or 2 paragraphs to try and put it in the right tense, use the right tenses, and just to formalise it into a piece of individual writing. But for everything like that, there's plenty of talking going on, plenty of time for the students to process the information at their own pace before we get together and discuss it as a class, and then we move on to the writing.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Okay.
That's really good. Can I just add something to it? When I do a quality mark visit, and I did happen to do this one, I always ask a group of students what they think the best thing is about the school. And one of your students used a phrase which I now keep quoting at people when I'm doing training. He said, the thing is, they really understand our teachers in the international section. They really understand that you can't actually read and write in a language until you can speak it. And it's a bit of the blindingly obvious, but sometimes I see people giving pupils who can't speak English written tasks to do in English, and I just see what they're going to be able to achieve. So that emphasis on speaking and listening is really very important and absolutely appropriate.